Hey, greetings everyone. Welcome back. It is GleeCon here again, bringing you another episode of Lore of Warcraft. Thank you so much for tuning in. On our last episode, we turned in all those quests from Black Fathom Deeps from that fated, fateful run with its ups and downs. And we also finally got an escort quest done that was causing us some issue, and maybe one other. So we started to continue that journey for Ashenvale. Based on the quests that are left, I'd guess we probably have maybe 2 episodes, but you never know with Classic. It could stretch into 3 before that one kind of dovetails back nicely and we can rejoin some of our characters over in Hillsbrad. Although with the Alliance region, it's really not a lot to going on there. We also, on the last side lore episode, we started the World of Warcraft Official Magazine, and this magazine is a very rare find. To my knowledge, it can only be found in print form. This is, I'm presenting to you what will be the only PDF copy. Right now, this is a drive that I have it on, but I have it currently processing to make into a PDF. I've fully finished scanning through so that I can upload this first issue, and I've fully scanned in the second issue, so it's ready to go for the shows, but there's still some, I still haven't processed it in terms of making it a PDF so I can put it onto the internet out there for those in the world. And I may or may not do that. I'm on the fence because it could be like an exclusive. If you were a Lore of Warcraft subscriber, might be better to keep this as something exclusive for me and for us and you guys. But the first magazine was cool, and we mostly looked at a preview of a preview for the Cataclysm game that was going to be coming out, because this is dropping. This first issue dropped right in the middle of Wrath of the Lich King, so before they were even done making content for Wrath, and when they were already planning the big expect that was going to be Cataclysm. All right, so we're going to kick off an article here. Like I said, each time I'm going to try to not stop us mid-article. We read one of the big feature ones, and we have our kind of second big feature here. This is an interview with Blizzard Entertainment's president. I don't know that Blizzard Entertainment, maybe it still exists now. I know that it's been kind of subsumed into Activision. So I don't know that this guy still has a job with them. I don't know. I didn't never even. This name doesn't, Mike Morhaime, doesn't sound too familiar to me, but let's see what we can learn about the dude. He talks about the birth of Blizzard, how World of Warcraft evolved into the world's biggest MMO, and why 12 million is actually a pretty small number. Okay, 12 million, I'm guessing, being the amount of players at the time. We are not afraid of a few voices criticizing the things we're doing. We just need to look at their comments objectively. Now, here's a picture of him back in the day. It looks like he's got quite a little fro going on, and this is Mike Morhaime's office in 1993, back when the company was still called Silicon and Synapse, was somewhat sparse. The developer had its first hit with The Lost Vikings. Some of you guys may have played that game. I want to say it was a Sega Genesis game. I played it a couple times when I was a kid and never made the connection until later years when I was Googling Blizzard games that they were connected. It's hard to miss Blizzard Entertainment's headquarters. Fully fenced within the immaculately trimmed landscaping of a large Orange County business park, the offices have a gated and guarded entry point that feels similar to that of a movie studio, complete with metal cutout letters spelling out the company name over the roadway. Dominating the main welcome area is an enormous, incredibly detailed, and frankly quite intimidating bronze statue of an orc riding a wolf, a stark contrast to the otherwise innocuous low-rise business offices that surround it. Sometimes you'll spot Blizzard employees playing hacky sack around it. Oh, to be in the knots. The halls are lined with everything you'd want to see. Life-size statues of night elves, framed artwork from the games, and various mementos from the past. Discreetly tucked away on the top floor of the main building, the office of the company's president, Mike Morhaime, is no exception. It feels like a combination of Cool Stuff Showcase and Blizzard Historical Archive. Shelves are lined with almost every release of every Blizzard product in every language you can think of, from a Genesis edition of The Lost Vikings to a Japanese PlayStation copy of Diablo, oh man, through to collector's edition and international boxes of World of Warcraft. There are action figures, framed Warcraft Visa cards. That would be so cool to actually have one of those. I would rock one. Toys, books, and of course, a mounted Frostmourne replica. You can still get those. It's from here that Mike has led the Alliance and the Horde to a force nearly 12 million strong. But he's no power-hungry Arthas. I think that I have a very strong team around me, and really no one person is responsible for all this, he says. There are too many things going on, so we really have to rely on each other. That's just something I think a lot of people at Blizzard see, that it's a team effort and everybody needs to feel passionately about what Blizzard's doing and feel ownership of it. And so, in the Inner Sanctum, Mike discusses his personal past, the vocal players of the present, and the company's future. Now, I know there were a lot of people that got banged in a big spot for the sexual harassment and stuff that was going on in Blizzard. So let's just take a peek. This is going to be something that we do that can be unique to this show. Let's look up Mike Morhaime and see if there's anything that will allow us to put some of these questions in context. So he's got his career. He now, I guess at 2020, he went over to Dreamhaven. I don't know what they make. Secret Door. Let's see. He is married. He has a $2 million mansion. He made a cameo in the show The Guild, which I've watched that show. It's pretty fun. There's also a movie called Warcraft The Beginning. That's interesting. There's another show too. So nothing a lot. It doesn't seem, because you would think that they would mention some of the stuff about the sexual harassment. Sounds like he got out before that hit the mainstream. So there's no ties to him with that there. But that was going on under his watch if he left in 2020. So it's kind of a hard to extricate or implicate him in any of that stuff. So we're just going to kind of go with the greater Blizzard history in mind and read this as a person who maybe was so high up that the culpability is limited there. Hard to say. Yeah, so interesting. Like this, just reading this has already got like my brain spinning with all kinds of different thoughts about context of all this stuff. Thinking about the number of people who are just getting broadband, that's a lot of people who are not playing World of Warcraft. Man, that just takes you there. The concept of people that just don't have broadband back then, that was a hurdle you had to overcome. I guess that's more of a worldwide thing because when World of Warcraft first dropped, I was a poor college student and I did not have a computer or internet at my house, my apartment, my squat house. As I mentioned on other episodes, I went over to friends' houses, girlfriends' houses, stuff like that, and either hopefully they had WoW and I would play on their account and make my own characters, or I would bring with me trial. You could just get tons of free trial copies of WoW from like gaming stores back then. I just had a stack, and if I could get someone that would let me pop it by from time to time and installed on their computer, which took 1,000 years back then. Still, it takes 1,000 years now. It takes like a day and a half to download World of Warcraft. All right. Learning how things work. By his own admission, Mike is a geek who made good. Growing up in the San Fernando Valley north of Los Angeles in the 70s and 80s, he liked Dungeons & Dragons, Star Wars, and Star Trek. I was also really interested in technology, he says. My first computer was a Bally professional arcade system, which I got when I was in 6th grade. I definitely liked playing games. I had a notebook where I listed every single game and who got the high scores on them so I could keep track of everything, but I was more interested in what I could do with the machine itself and what the possibilities were. It had a basic cartridge, which is where I first learned how to program. You had access to 1.5K RAM, which wasn't a lot back then either, he laughs. Before long, Mike's curiosity led him to start digging into how the machine worked. I used to subscribe to a newsletter that a guy in the Bay Area published. It featured type-in basic programs and articles explaining how to get the Bally to do things that weren't documented. I'm going to tell you right now, when I was in middle school, we had a class. I don't remember if it was called programming or something like that, but it was, you just programmed stuff in BASIC, and I took that for, I don't remember, maybe 2 years or something in middle school. So there's just little things like that where now I'm a pretty tech savvy person. I'm not a programmer or anything, but I'm pretty tech savvy, and I think just little things that stacked up. A lot of what he just said applies to me too. I'm probably a little younger than him, but he says with nostalgic enthusiasm, he just loved it, and so does GleeCon. I waited by the mailbox for that letter. I knew exactly what day every month it was going to arrive, and I'd take it to school and read it 15 times. I'd go home and type in the programs, debug them, and store them on cassette through a 300 baud connection. Most of them weren't that interesting, but I was fascinated to learn that what they were making the machine do and how they worked. It wasn't just computers that piqued Mike's curiosity. If there was any way you could connect one thing to something else and use it to control that thing, that was really fascinating to me, he explains. Like with audio equipment, if there was a way of connecting something to a stereo system so you could transfer recordings from one device to another, or replay the video or the audio, that would really get my interest. I remember when we took a family trip to Alaska, my dad took a video camera and shot a bunch of footage. When we got home, I edited it down to my own version of the trip and tacked on an intro piece like it was a feature for a talk show. That's kind of cool. Then I added a second piece where I experimented using the footage with some video feedback and then added my own music, and that was kind of cool. At the time, it was all about experimenting, Mike continues. I want to go to Alaska. That just triggered me. That's really my goal, is to convince my wife for this upcoming summer next year we usually do a summer trip 9 out of 10 years. And I really want to hit Alaska, do some of the hikes up there. At the time, it was all about experimenting, Mike continues. I'd think, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I could do this? And then I'd sit down and figure out if it was possible, and in the process, learn more about the things I was using. I wanted to understand how things work. I wanted to know how radios could pick up signals coming through the air and turn them into awesome audio that came out of the speaker, or how TVs received video and audio. I wanted to know how it was encoded. How was it broadcast? How did the circuitry interpret it? How could I switch channels and pick what I wanted? There was so much cool stuff. Computers that could store and interpret data, and telephones that could take your voice and send it to anywhere in the world. How the hell did it all work? I figured electrical engineers knew how this stuff worked, and if I was one, I would know too. Electronics and that kind of electrical engineering was also an elective I took when I was in high school. But this makes me think the way he's talking about sorry for all the asides today, but this conversation is really, maybe he's a kindred soul, maybe this is just me projecting. But I think about that way that things work. So my wife is a nurse, and she's been a nurse for almost 20 years now, and I've been with her that whole time. So she talks to me. Sometimes she'll tell me work stories, and she works with a doctor who's her friend. And so we're joking around with the doctor one day, and they are flippantly talking about blood pressure ratings, like 60s over 40s and stuff like that. So when they're talking about it, they ask me, they mentioned that they were talking to some person who was affiliated with the medical field but didn't have a background in it, and they were just shocked that when they threw some random blood pressure numbers out at them, that they had no idea if those were realistic numbers, good numbers, bad numbers. They wouldn't be able to give a guess at their own blood pressure. And I was like, I wouldn't be able to do that either. And so my wife was like embarrassed in the moment, and later on she's like, I can't believe you don't know all these years, and you hear me tell all these work stories, and you just don't know what's a good blood pressure, and I can't believe that. And I tried to explain to her, kind of in the way that he's talking about breaking down these electronic boards and reading his magazine, like, you just say those numbers, but that's not how my brain works. I need to unpack that and understand why. What makes a 60 over 40? What makes it good or bad? What makes a average mean blood pressure, or whatever they call it, where what's the formula for that? And where does that come from? And where do the numbers in the formula come from? So it wasn't until she could give me a gist, and then we together looked up the specific formulas, and I was able to kind of piece together at least some kind of an anchor point, so that now I can kind of get a picture. And for me, I still have to default to the formula. If she spits off the blood pressure, I have to run the formula in my head real quick and decide if it's within the healthy average BP range or whatever. But that's kind of how my mind has always worked too. I like to, and maybe this guy feels this way too, where he said he'd read the magazine 15 times. Like, I'll sit through a meeting at work and someone will explain how to do something, like, I don't know, I don't want to get too lost in the weeds, but let's say someone's explaining how to run a certain particular function or program. And then they almost without fail suck at teaching, and but if they can give me the concept roots, then I can go and look it up and sit down and read it 15 times and teach myself and get an understanding of how things work. And that's just how I like to do it. So enough of that aside. I'm just more fascinated so far more about this guy how someone that could become such a successful CEO, president of one of my favorite companies, and what kind of brain gets someone to a spot like that? Because you hear this story a lot where it's a computer nerd that works their way up, and I like to see the marriage of those two ideas. Yeah, you can be a computer nerd, but you also have to have these other skills to become a financial leader. Okay, Silicon Vikings and rock and roll. When Mike graduated from high school in 1985, he's older than me. He headed to UCLA to study electrical engineering and found he was most interested in computer architecture and digital circuit design. In my last year, I took a bunch of software classes, he recalls. It was there where I met Alan Adam, who was a computer science engineer. We'd hang out a lot and talk about some of the things we were learning and what we were interested in. When we graduated, Alan recruited Frank Pierce and me to join him in what were the beginnings of this company. Here's a picture of him, and this is in a sidebar, like a little side text, so we're kind of break from the main interview and talk about esports for a minute. He kind of looks like Hobbitish right there. First of all, meet Olaf. This is Lost Vikings. If early Blizzard superstars Baleog the Fierce, Olaf the Stout, and Eric the Swift looked vaguely familiar, just look back to Uldaman. All three Lost Vikings appear as cameo quest givers in World of Warcraft. That's true. And I've made that connection seeing them in that game. I think they're a boss now in the current version of Uldaman. Or one flies in a blimp and stuff. That might be them. Okay. How Blizzard wants to shape the future of electronic competition. One subject that has certainly created some spirited discussions is the emergence of competitive gaming, commonly called esports, which Mike says is an investment in the community outside the game, which we think adds a lot of depth to the whole experience. In a similar approach to the way World of Warcraft is being engineered to deliver an experience that can be enjoyed by all, Mike feels that esports also needs to be accessible to a broad audience. He explains, "We're trying to make it more enjoyable to watch games as a spectator. Some of the things we're doing with StarCraft 2 are designed to facilitate that, such as implementing an observer mode and holding live tournaments at events like BlizzCon and then posting replays so that people who weren't present can watch the tournaments as they unfold. That way they can see what the top players are doing and why they're so successful and learn from that. It elevates the game for everybody. We think it's just the beginning, and it's our role to make the matches more enjoyable and more understandable to people who are watching. We look at what happened to poker when they brought it in the whole cam, when they brought in the whole cam, a small camera that shows the TV audience what cards each player is holding. If you watched a televised tournament before the whole cam, it was pretty boring, but you bring in the whole cam, and it's a totally different experience. Suddenly you have more information than the people who are playing the game, and you can second guess things as they're happening, look at the different strategies. You're in the game. We're trying to learn from that and see how we can apply that to computer games. It's not a trivial problem to solve, but it's something we intuitively feel we can achieve. And I think that'll be good for the industry and the games." This is cool to see. This must be that statue out in front of their company. Look at that, the different perspective of it. That's just dope. It's, well, this is an old school orc if you look at his face. I can't quite see what it says there. It's dedicated to, maybe we'll get to read in the sidebar, but it's dedicated to someone. Orc Rampage. This epic statue graces the Blizzard Entertainment campus in Irvine, California. It was created by New Zealand-based Weta, famed for its work on the Lord of the Rings films. That's cool. I mean, just imagine going in every day to work, and that's what is that right there just would make you feel like, dude, my job is dope. That beginning was called Silicon and Synapse. As part of the founding trio, Mike felt his contributions were a lot of curiosity, a lot of passion, and a lot of time, he laughs, and a desire to learn. Alan had way more experience than Frank and me in terms of game development, and he convinced both of us that it wasn't rocket science, so we really had this belief that we could learn anything by reading books or observing how other companies were doing things. And he writes, "The mission of the company is to create an epic experience." "We initially started out doing ports and conversions of existing games from one platform to another," he continues. "It was a great learning experience because We got to see how other companies solved a lot of challenges in gaming. But in parallel to doing those conversions, we were also working on new games. Almost from the beginning, we were working on RPM Racing, which was a sequel to the old Commodore 64 game Racing Destruction set. But we gave it a facelift and really evolved the game. We did Rock and Roll Racing after that and pushed it even further. In 1992, the company released one of its defining hits, The Lost Vikings, an action puzzle game with a lot of humor and style. It was a completely original title inspired by Lemmings, said Mike. We thought it was a really cool idea to have puzzles where you had to figure out how to get past obstacles using a certain set of tools. When we first started designing it, we had tons of these little Vikings wandering around, but then we evolved the design from there into more of an action puzzle game that used 3 specialized Vikings. It really found itself out of this evolution. It's kind of like Trine, if you've ever heard of Trine. I don't know that I've made that connection before, but basically Trine is a ripoff of that concept. We've always been kind of like that. We start off with an idea, but we're always ready to be flexible along the way to adapt it with any new information that comes in. Evolving a monster. That evolutionary approach played an important part in helping influence the company's direction in the early days. We'd go to CES every year and look at what everyone was doing, remembered Mike. When we returned to the office, we'd have an all-hands meeting, which at the time was maybe 7 or 8 people, and we'd talk about what we'd seen, what direction we thought the industry was going, and what we needed to do to incorporate what we learned into our approach to the games we were working on. We were constantly trying to understand why some games were cool and why some games weren't. There was a general idea that technology was advancing rapidly and there would be this convergence of different kinds of media. We felt that at some point in the future, interactive stories would take place in a virtual fantasy world where you have an avatar and you interact with other people who also have avatars. Down the road, we knew we wanted to do that kind of thing, and that's exactly what World of Warcraft is. There's other things. Obviously, they didn't invent that concept. There were other people that beat them to the punch, but it was definitely the most successful. Down the road, Blizzard would certainly do that kind of thing and actually flirted with the idea as early as 1994 during the development of Warcraft Orcs and Humans. We thought that it was a really cool fantasy universe we were creating. Wouldn't it be great if one day you could be one of the guys who existed in the Warcraft world? We knew that would be really cool, but it wasn't really technically feasible, so we put the idea on the shelf. Then in 1997, Origin Systems created Ultima Online, and we looked at that and said, wow, it's technically feasible to do this now. But he adds with a grin, we still didn't start on it. Right, so there you go, Ultima Online. And I don't even know that Ultima Online was the first one, but it was definitely the first to do it on a big scale. And even Ultima Online is, if you have ever played that, it's not quite as immersive as the Blizzard games and some of the other MMORPGs. Another 2 years would pass before work finally began in earnest on what would become World of Warcraft, and even then it wasn't a straightforward beginning. It required a sacrificed project to really set the team on the right road. Mike explains that after StarCraft shipped in March 1998, a new internal team was formed to start work on a squad-based sci-fi game codenamed Nomad. They were trying to create a new style of game in a new genre set in a brand new world, he continues, but they were struggling in a variety of different areas. After a few months, we looked at what the team had done so far and started to wonder if Nomad was really the game we wanted to make at that time. We decided that no, it probably wasn't. Instead, the consensus was that we'd rather be working on a massively multiplayer game set in the Warcraft universe, so we asked ourselves why we weren't doing that. And if we couldn't think of a good reason, with that, Nomad was canceled and the team shifted its focus to developing a Warcraft MMO. Sidebar earning honor. In 2008, Mike Morhaime was inducted into the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences Hall of Fame. That same year, World of Warcraft was honored with a Technical and Engineering Emmy. I didn't even know they gave Emmys for that. Unless we're talking about the movie. That was in 1999, but World of Warcraft still wouldn't appear for another 5 years. It was a very large and very complicated project. I can imagine setting up the foundation for that. And it took quite a bit of time for it to find itself. We went through a lot of different iterations in terms of the game design and gameplay, what kind of engine and architecture was required to run it. That makes sense. We don't have the game planned out 5 or 10 years and probably shouldn't. I agree with that. What's more, early designs of the game to be incorporated a single-player mode. We originally went down different paths in terms of what we wanted the game to be like, says Mike. We just released Diablo 2, which was both a single-player and free-to-play multiplayer game, and our initial thoughts were, why don't we do the same with this? But as we headed down that path, the team realized designing a single-player game and a massively multiplayer game were two totally different things. We questioned whether we really wanted to design 2 games or whether we wanted to pick one and make sure we did that really well, so we dropped single player. Genius idea, because you could basically play it single player. Then we realized in order to make a massively multiplayer game that's competitive with all the other MMOs, you really have to leave the dev team on the project for years after the game's release and let them continue to evolve new content to keep it interesting. But that requires a lot of resources, which means you really need a recurring revenue stream to support that. And if you have a recurring revenue stream, that means you need to have a higher level of customer service to support these paying customers. All of these business decisions were driven by what the game needed, which is why we now have 3,000 customer service people around the world and a large development staff that continues to create content and provide support functionality. They probably do it like COD, where it's set into, I would imagine that it's set into 2 companies, and you're like, they're probably already fully making the next expansion, and the team that's currently working on Dragonflight is probably wrapping up that content while parts of them are already brainstorming the expansion after the next one. When we started World of Warcraft, we weren't thinking, hey, let's grow the company to 4,000 people in 5 years. I wouldn't be surprised if it's bigger than that. We were thinking, well, their company might be bigger than that, but it might also be, it's so departmentalized. We were thinking, let's keep the company small and make a really cool game, but ultimately what won was, let's make a really cool game and do whatever it takes to provide what the game requires, and that's what this game required. Learning from experience. Making a cool game sounds like a very simple goal, but it's one that requires a large array of complex solutions and decisions. Is that the way Blizzard normally thinks? Goal first, solution second? The mission of the company is to create an epic experience, Mike clarifies. Every step of the way we think about what type of game we want to play. Once we decide what we want to play, we try to make it. We always want to invest in the player experience so that they walk away feeling like they got at least the amount of value that they contributed. If they walk away feeling that was great, that increases their sense of trust in the Blizzard name. Ultimately, that's what we want to invest in. We want to build loyal players who want to come back and play our next game. I mean, and that's a good point, because back then you had to buy the game, which was shelling out the same price as every other game, and then you had to pay $15 a month or whatever it was, and that was almost unheard of back then. And I remember that when I first quit this game right before Cataclysm came out, right about the time this magazine's coming out, it was when, and I've talked about this before, my account got hacked, and I just was furious that something like that could happen, because it couldn't happen in other games. Where I was also paying money. Now it's just nothing. You go drop $15 on stupid diamonds for freaking Candy Crush or whatever, and don't bat an eyelid. So now, as I'm old, and plus I'm older, I'm not a kid scraping for my pennies. Now I'm able to more contextualize, like, if I pay $15 a month, did I play the game enough? I mean, you would spend $15 going to the movies, So I feel like if I had an enjoyable 2 hours, then it's worth my $15. And not to mention all of the time, this show that I'm making you guys couldn't exist. And I spend, I make 5, 6, 7 episodes a week minimum. So I'm spending on camera sometimes. I mean, sure, this right here is not the in-game content, but I'm spending on camera 5 to 10 hours a week making this content right there. And you do, you do that 20 to 40 hours a month. That's worth $15. Not to mention all the time I spend playing off camera. Even if I only play once or twice a week with my wife, we usually play a couple hours each time. I mean, so you take that up and you get, all of a sudden you're sitting there at 20 hours minimum, 20 hours worth of time with my wife that I'm having a great time with. My son plays it on the side. I mean, you double the pay because she has an account, but still 20 hours of hangout, and it cost me $30 or whatever. And really, I have so much gold saved up, I could easily buy WoW tokens for the next like 10 years. So sure, I could do it that way too. But it's so when you start to think about it differently. But I understand this process that he's going through, where you really have to get the buy-in, and they were having to do it. They were at the bleeding edge of that. The games currently in development, StarCraft 2, Diablo 3, and the unnamed MMO, I didn't know they have an unnamed MMO, all have a few things in common. They are designed to be intuitive and to run well on your system. What's their unnamed MMO? We try to make games that are accessible. Oh, I don't know. Unless it's the what's that one, that the lane game, the one that has the not tower defense, the one that has like such a toxic community. We try to make games that are accessible to a wide audience, which means putting out games that run on a wide range of hardware, explains Mike, who considers accessibility one of the company's core strengths. We think that if you've bought a computer in the last year or two, you should be able to run a Blizzard game. We also think that when you sit down and play the game, you shouldn't have to be an expert in the genre to play it. In fact, even if you've never played a computer game before, we think you should be able to sit down and play a Blizzard game with very little assistance from those around you. Ideally, that means you're a really friendly learning curve where the game gives you enough information so that you know what you're supposed to do from the beginning. And that's where they push it more in Cataclysm and Mists, and that does turn off hardcore gamers. But there's I get it. I'm not one of those just purists that are like, screw it. I get it. There's pros and cons to both, so that you know what you're supposed to do from the beginning. If those first few minutes are frustrating, we could potentially lose the player's interest, not only in this game, but in other games we make in the future. That's absolutely straight. Striking a happy balance. Of course, keeping existing players happy is another challenge that's fundamentally important to Blizzard, and Mike is very clear about the company's priorities in that respect. One of our core values is gameplay first. That really is the main thing. Ultimately, it comes down to whether or not the game is fun. We wouldn't want to do anything that's going to break the fun of the game. Mike explains that this applies not only to Blizzard's approach to game design, but to the different services the company offers. For some people, there are certain things standing in the way of them having fun. If you're a level 80 Night Elf and your best friend is a level 80 Orc, it used to be that you couldn't play together unless one of you re-rolled. We took the time to develop the faction change service in response to the requests of those players who were in this situation. This service provides, we'll finish our sentence before we get back to those two things, an opportunity for one of those people to make a decision, pay a little extra money, and be able to play with their friend, which enhances the experience for both of them. That's the kind of thing we look at. Is this going to add value for the people who choose to do it? Is it going to detract from the people who don't choose to do it? With faction changes, we felt like it's going to add a lot of value for the people who want it, and it's really not going to detrimentally impact anyone. Right. Okay, now they've got a couple sidebars in this interview. The Poker Pro. He did mention poker. For the ultimate test of wits and wills, many strategy fans turn to poker, and Mike Morhaime is no exception. In addition to enjoying friendly games with fellow Blizzard employees, Mike has competed in the World Series of Poker and placed second in the 2006 Dice Celebrity Poker Tournament, besting WSOP pros like Perry Friedman and Scott Fishman, losing only to BioWare's Dr. Ray Musica. For an analytical mind like Mike's, the appeal is in the diversity. I think it's one of the most fascinating games that there is, he explains. It's interesting on so many different levels. It's different with minor changes to the rules. It's different with more or less people at the table, with different people in a tournament. Who are the people? How are they playing today? What is the hand history you've had with them that day? And what information have you exposed to them? It's so fascinating. There's not that many decisions you have to make, but they're really impactful. And based on the cards they have and based on the information you know, there are optimal ways to play. Trying to figure those out on the fly while you're playing is part of the fun. I have to say, poker's not my strong suit. I love it. I love the math behind it. What gets me is the bluffing behind it. I am not the world's best bluffer. I'm not a good liar. So I guess that's a flaw. But I do like poker, and it is fun. If it's just a pure strategy, if I'm playing with a bunch of amateurs, I'll kick their butts because the math and the odds and all that stuff, that comes easy to me. But yeah, when I used to in college, I used to play with a bunch of like a frat house full of lawyers, and we'd have a weekly poker game, and it was like a $25 buy-in, and you could have one rebuy in the middle of the night, and I never won. Not once. Not in years of playing with them. I never won the whole tournament, but I had a lot of fun. Loved it. The musical Morhaime, president by day, rocker by night, music lover 24 hours a day. I'm the bass player. I don't determine the genre. I just play along with it. Mike Morhaime is more than just Blizzard's president. He's also its bassist. Well, he's the bassist for The Artist, formerly known as Level 80 Elite Tauren Chieftain, the company's in-house metal band, which you may have seen perform at BlizzCon or at the World's End Tavern in Shattrath City. Oh, that's neat. Well, also, when we go to Shattrath, when we play that, we'll have to keep in mind that this band, the bassist is based after him. Mike's love affair with music goes back to his formative years. It all began in first grade or so when I started to take piano lessons. I wanted to play the organ. There was this guy who lived across the street from my grandmother, and he had this triple-decker organ with all these knobs and dials and buttons and pedals and 3 levels of keys, and thought it was the coolest thing ever. I said, I want to learn how to play that. And my mom told me, you can get an organ as soon as you master the piano. So I said, okay, let's start. Yeah, master the piano, he says, laughing hard. It took me years to realize how ridiculous that was. Growing up in the 70s and 80s, his musical tastes run to the classic rock, The Who, Chicago, Pink Floyd. I like Billy Joel a lot too, Kansas, Boston. But a few years after 15-year-old Mike got a guitar, he discovered Canadian progressive rockers Rush. Oh man, so talented. That was enough to push him into becoming a public performer. I started this band, IRS, Incredible Rush Simulation, that's funny, with some friends, he added almost sheepishly. But Mike's biggest musical influence was the Fab Four. Growing up, I was a huge Beatles fan, he said. I read every Beatles book that I could get my hands on in high school and junior high, so was I. That was my first love, was the Beatles. 9 years old, I was hooked, and I never looked back. And junior high, so I know quite a lot about Beatles history and trivia. Many years later, Blizzard gave him a rare opportunity to enjoy Beatlemania on a personal level. One of the Wings guitarists, Lawrence Juber, is a good friend of Russell Brower, our studio director, explains Mike. We had him play when we made the Diablo 3 announcement in Paris. Russell mentioned that I was a big Beatles fan, and Lawrence said, at some point we're going to have to talk Beatles. And I said, oh, I am so there, he says with a laugh. So at the after party at the Worldwide International, I had a solid half hour, and he just let me grill him about stuff. What was it like? How did you meet Paul McCartney? How did you get into Wings? Were you a Beatles fan growing up? What was Paul McCartney like? It was so cool. I'm 2 degrees now. I listened to a podcast the other day that had Paul McCartney on it. But Liverpool's favorite sons gave Mike an example for his own musical path too. Before the Beatles, Paul McCartney was a guitarist, but he wasn't the best guitarist in the band, and generally the worst guitarist becomes the bassist. You don't have to be good at math to realize that if you're not that great of a guitarist and you want to be in a band, then maybe you should buy a bass, so that's what I did. Armed with that bass, he went on to play in Blizzard's Just for Fun metal band. It's unusual when the Big Office band includes the guy who has the big office, but the whole endeavor can trace its origin to Mike's garage. I had one of my best friends as a bassist in a band. He had a group that was playing covers at my house for fun right up until StarCraft went into crunch, and then we pretty much stopped doing that for a while when we started playing again. Sammy, lead singer Samwise Didier, imagine your name being Samwise, was very interested in writing our own original songs. The guys in the band are pretty inspired by Metallica and bands like that. I'm the bass player, so I don't determine the genre, he says with a laugh. I just play along with it. Playing along with it has included some pretty major stage mates, like opening for Ozzy Osbourne at this year's BlizzCon, which Mike humbly chalks up to a really cool life experience. Our first gig was opening for The Offspring at BlizzCon, says Mike with a chuckle. When someone says, would your band like to open for The Offspring? You say yes. But I have to admit that being up there totally scares me. I'm usually thinking, man, I just want to get through this without screwing up. We haven't played that many gigs, Mike confesses. In the beginning, it was like, we don't think they understand we're not a real band, but we said yes, and we're going to practice like crazy, and we're going to try to make this an enjoyable experience for everybody. We're not going to take ourselves too seriously because we're not a real band. We're just kind of a joke band. It's about fun. It's not about us. It's about the games, about having fun with the universes, and a little bit of role-playing. So is it a case of life imitating art? Is Mike role-playing a rock star? Well, maybe, he admits with a smile, but I'm just the bassist. I'm in the background, trying not to be noticed too much. Okay, back to the faction thing that we're talking about. What's more, tweaks like faction swaps support another core value of the company. One of our core values is gameplay first. We also feel a big part of having a fulfilling, enjoyable experience is being able to connect with other humans, explains Mike. As the platform creator, the more we can allow you to not only meet people in game and connect with them, but also connect with your real life friends and have shared virtual experiences with them and then take those experiences back into the real world, I think that makes playing games online more meaningful. That's true. Remember the episode we did where this hero wears a cape or whatever? That was one of my favorite moments of gaming. That was another human. Those are some of the things we're thinking about in the design of Battle.net, for example. We want to create a community of Blizzard gamers that spans across all of our games and help them have great experiences online with friends, family, and other people they know. And while Mike says player reactions are always a factor, he admits that keeping players informed is the key to keeping them happy. If we don't do a good job of explaining why we're making certain decisions, even if they're the right decisions, the community might not understand them, he figures. Sometimes the community will react negatively to upcoming features, even though nobody out there has actually experienced the changes we're talking about yet. That can be our fault because maybe we didn't communicate our vision well and players are extrapolating out based on limited information. Communicating our vision and the reasoning behind changes is an important part of the process. Mike agrees it's easier said than done. I think the other thing we've realized is that you can't please everybody all the time, he admits. What you want to do is please most of the people, most of the time, or most people all the time, really. But no matter what we do, whenever we change something, somebody is not going to be happy about it. We're not afraid of a few lone voices criticizing things we're doing. Plus, those critics are always the loudest. They're even though the vast majority are like, whatever. We just need to look at their comments objectively and be guided by doing what we think is right for the game. We also get a lot of positive feedback, and we listen to that too. If you read the forums, you'll see that there's a pendulum that swings. When somebody makes a sentiment that the community doesn't agree with, the silent majority will become loud. That's true. I do. I think that. Mike reads the forums himself, calling them a good litmus test for where the game is at any point in time. Our players are definitely vocal. Another one of our values is every voice matters, which I think is critical at Blizzard. To speak up, to listen for players, to listen to other voices within the company, and constantly iterate to make sure everything we're doing is as good as it can be. And you know what I think is interesting, actually? I was just having this thought today. You read comments on game stuff, forums. It's overwhelmingly negative all the time. And you look at the chat, there's so much negativity. But then you go to like a band's page where someone's putting videos of lyric videos or something that came up from the band, overwhelmingly, almost exclusively positive. So I think there's something psychologically noteworthy there between our interaction with music, which is art, and the interaction we have with gaming, which is in its own way, it's a melding, it's an art, but it's an art that we have ownership of. We're a part of the art, and as soon as you get yourself involved, it really brings out the douche in a lot of people. It just really does, and I think it's not just the hiding behind the keyboard element, because there are instances where you have that hiding behind the keyboard, and people are so positive and loving, and you just see so much. You see that in World of Warcraft. You see that in gaming. You do see that supportiveness, but you just see so much frustration. And I wonder if when you make yourself a part of the art, when you make yourself a part of the experience, if your own insecurities now place your own fears, music is frozen and it doesn't get iterated on. If you love a song, that song exists in that form. But if they change something in the game you played, that might permanently affect the game. Or if a run goes bad in a dungeon or whatever, there's always that you're part of a failed experience, and you can take ownership for the part that you played, or you can point your fingers, and that's that internal versus external locus of control. I really think the world is at best 50-50 when it comes to that. I really do think probably half the world point outward when something bad happens, and that's just a shame. Let's wrap up this article. The philosophy pod the philosophy podcast here from GleeCon. Like, you know what it is? It's the late in the day and I'm drinking coffee. I don't do that much, but then you just hear me start to go off on all the little eggs of thought I've been sitting on all day. What next? Mike feels Blizzard's approach to development is flexible enough to lead the way into the future. We really don't have a World of Warcraft planned out for 5 or 10 years, he admits. We have it planned to the next expansion, and we have ideas for what should come after that, but nothing's really set in stone, and probably shouldn't be. So they're talking about, they know Mists of Pandaria are coming next. And, I mean, so they say they kind of have an idea for Mists of Pandaria at this point, and Cataclysm's done. Things change, people come up with new ideas as the game evolves and as the industry evolves. And that's true. You learn while it's going live. You would never want to be that far out. But with World of Warcraft now being played by nearly 12 million people, how much higher can that player base really grow? Let's take another aside. How many player World of Warcraft subscriber count? So this is, as of 2022, 4.8 million. So they're down. Now this is giving us at around 4.8 million seat at any given moment. 34,000 people are playing. Down here, though, it says it has 129 million players. I wonder if that's where they're getting these numbers from. Yeah, so right here, that's 2023, 4.6 million. Latest esports guide, 8.5 million monthly players. So not a single competitor. Yeah, so they're saying this is the total player count. So I wonder if we're in 2015, 5.5. So they are slightly going down. But if you think about it, they went from 5.5 in 2015 to 4.8 now. That's not that much of a decline considering how long the game's been going. It says it's the WoW sub count has dropped 41% since Shadowlands. So, I mean, yeah. See, this is March, 6.5 million in 2021. So they are dropping. And I wonder what that's all about. And I think maybe they see that's as of 2022. I'd be curious. But either way, so think about that also. They were at 12 million. Now, where are we getting these numbers? Is this worldwide? What is that, 4.5? Is that worldwide? Are we talking about paid subscribers? Are we versus people who use the WoW? You know, what are the... Yeah, so this is obviously peak, though. Wrath, this is peak WoW. But with World of Warcraft now being played by nearly 12 million people, how much higher can that player base really grow? Well, 12 million doesn't sound like a big number to me, Mike says with a laugh. Think about the number of people around the world who are getting into the internet for the first time, the people who are just now getting broadband, and the people who are getting broadband over the next 5 years. That's a lot of people who are not playing World of Warcraft. I think there's an opportunity for us to continue evolving the game and to continue to make it more accessible so that when those people do decide to play World of Warcraft, the game is ready for them. So where does that quest for new players end? Mike laughs again. Maybe if there are 12 million people who aren't playing? Ultimately, Mike doesn't gauge success by the number of players so much as player satisfaction. If we think our next game is the greatest thing ever and we put it out and the reaction is completely negative but it sells a gazillion copies, I don't think you can call it a success, muses. If our players are happy and think we're developing an experience that meets or exceeds their expectations, if our employees feel good about the experience we're delivering and the way the company's treating them, I think those are things that really matter. And I read a Reddit or something that was talking about maybe the model changes, right? Maybe rather than having these large expansions every 2 years, you get more trimmed down and you start having maybe an expansion every year, but it's a smaller, more curated expansion. I would go for that. I think there's just parts of it. I love the storyline. I like some of the things, but yeah, you got to think what brings people back. And really, it's rolling alts and experiencing the whole experience over and over again. You could just never stop playing. That's what's cool. They do have so many elements in place. For me, I don't foresee a time, unless they shut these servers off, I don't foresee a time where I would stop. Foresee a time. Finally, of the people, on the eve of the Wrath of the Lich King launch, Mike Morhaime visited some of the dedicated players that lined up to be the first into Northrend. That's pretty cool. All right, so next time that was just one large feature article that we read. I spent a lot of time on it, but it was also they won't all be that long. That one had a lot of text. There's a lot like this one that have a lot of pictures, which we'll pick up animal magnetism next time. This is a community feature. But yeah, I just this one had a lot of thought for me. So thank you for bearing with me. I hope that it was enjoyable. And if my 2 cents are worth as much as anybody else's, so maybe less. Thanks, everybody. We got another episode in the pipe, 5x5. Thank you so much for tuning in, for watching. I appreciate you so much, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Adios.